You are listening to audio from the Decidedly podcast. For more information, find us on Instagram at Decidedly Podcast.
I have a question for you. When you were growing up, what do you think happened that gave you a sense of confidence? Like, what types of things helped build your confidence?
Oh, man, I don't know that it was like one thing, but a lot of different things gave me confidence. I think playing sports gave me confidence. Martial arts definitely gave me confidence. I think like you taught me a lot of things that I quickly realized were not normal for kids to know or do. Like you taught me to how to behave in public and how to interact with adults and how to speak confidently. Like talking to strangers, talking in front of groups. I was always very confident doing that because you would make me do it even when I was really, really young. Mm-hmm. So that gave me, I don't know, a lot of
I remember we would drive in the cars and I would continue to ask you questions anytime we were driving somewhere. It was a series of, I'm testing you on geography, or I'm testing you on history, or testing you on politics, or state facts, or whatever it was. And I'm surprised at how many kids that I would talk to that would be your age who knew absolutely nothing about the world around them.
Yeah, you spent a lot of time teaching us things that you thought were important that I wasn't going to learn in school, and that gave me a lot of confidence in academically. It gave me a lot of confidence in the way that I presented myself. Yeah, of course, there were times when I was a young kid that I wasn't very confident in certain areas, but I think that carried over into adulthood and being, in a career where obviously we're talking to tons of strangers every day when we do this show. And when I talk with my clients and present to audiences in auditoriums and things like that, it's easier for me it's never fazed me, ever since I was a kid.
Right.
And I think a lot of it is because of what you pushed me to do uncomfortable things a lot. And when I became an adult, doing uncomfortable things was not something that I had to teach myself to enjoy. It was something that I had always done.
Well, I think our parents' role is, as we look at working ourselves out of a job as a parent, is to make sure we're instilling appropriate confidence in our kids. And so that's a decision I tried to make.
Yeah, you did it.
Talked about that with Dan.
We talked about that with our guest today, Dan. Yeah, Dan Caldwell is a highly, highly accomplished entrepreneur, and he was the visionary founder of Tapout, a renowned brand in the mixed martial arts industry. If you ever watched a UFC fight in your life, you know Tapout. Dan propelled Tapout to remarkable achievements, establishing it as a prominent name in the field. As now the host of the Pretty and Punk podcast, Dan delves into the intersection of business and parenthood, sharing valuable insights and personal experiences. Through his podcast and entrepreneurial ventures, Dan continues to make a significant impact, offering a unique perspective on achievement, parenthood, and living a fulfilling life. We talked about so many great topics. Obviously, we talked about the history of Tapout, how it became one of the most prominent clothing brands, and certainly the most prominent clothing brand in mixed martial arts world. What his
even
journey
extended
was like,
beyond that too.
Yeah, what his journey was like starting that company, what his journey was like selling that company after the death of Charles Lewis, his co-founder, and what Dan went through mentally and going through that significant life transition. Near the end of our talk, we dove more into family life and the intersection of the entrepreneur's journey and the father's journey, and we got into some great topics there. Obviously, Dan had a lot in common with us in that topic. So stick around. This is one of my favorite conversations that we've had on the show. Dan is one of the most insightful characters we've had the pleasure of talking to and has one of the best stories. So hang out with us for a little bit. You'll learn something. You'll laugh a little bit. I'm Sanger Smith. As always, I'm with my dad, Sean Smith, and this is Decidedly. So I think, Dan, you and Sean are the only people that I could address as an obscenity on this show and have that received well.
Well, you've called me a lot worse than punk ass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't used it lately, but
I bet not. Yeah.
but yeah. My kid calls me that every once in a while, but
Well, so how did that originate? Take me back, because I want to talk about your kids. I want to talk about the work you're doing right now, but take me back to that time when punk ass originated and you were starting Tapout.
it actually started before that. I originally wanted to be a police officer. So going through high school, well, I wanted to be an entrepreneur too. So I was taking, I had lied about my address to go to a different high school where they had actually had law enforcement classes, but they also had entrepreneurial classes there. It was like the rich kids' high school. I lived kind of in a bad area of town, and my high school didn't have that type of stuff. So I had lied about my address, used my friend's address, so I could go to this high school. And I took this law enforcement class and decided I need to be doing that. But I was a skater at the time. I have a tattoo on my inside of my lip that says punk ass, and that's kind of where the name came from. So it just kind of stuck. I didn't end up using it later. Of course, I wouldn't show anybody. I became a police officer, so I was a police officer for like 7 years. And of course, I didn't show that to anybody then.
No.
But later down the road, when the opportunity came up and we were kind of looking to make up nicknames, that was the nickname I got.
So how did you, Sanger and I, before we got on air, we're talking about Tapout, because Sanger is constantly showing me MMA fights and things like that. And
I had to convince him, just like you and the rest of the squad had to convince the world.
Yeah.
I had to convince him that it wasn't cockfighting. So it's been a long 20-year journey for us of me kind of bringing Sean into the fold of normal MMA fans.
well, that's what it was when MMA started. That's what it was. I mean, it was rough.
Well, it was for sure. I mean, if you go back and watch UFC 1 and 2, especially 1 and 2, it's cringe. I mean, you'll have to it's a different sport at that time.
Yeah.
But for us, in 1993, I was in the police academy, and me and my partner, our best friend, was in the police academy. We were both, trying to be police officers. We weren't hired at the time, and so we were putting ourselves through. We were paying for ourselves to go through the police academy. And during the police academy, he got hired for the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. I got hired for the police department, and he told me, he came to me one day and he said, "Hey man, there's this big event coming on about mixed martial arts." And we were training at the time. We were kind of like going to my backyard. I was living with another police officer, and we would go in our backyard. We had a heavy bag back there, and we'd go train and work out. And so he came over and said, "This event's coming on tonight. We got to watch this. It's on this pay-per-view thing." And we were trying to figure out how to watch it. We ended up watching it, and it blew us away. We couldn't believe what they were doing on there. And it is a lot of shock. But it's law enforcement. It's real stuff. If you think about what law enforcement goes through, people don't want to know what they have to deal with. And so we said, we need to be training in that. We need to be doing that. And a week later, we were training with Hoist Gracie in Torrance, California. And it gripped us. It took over our lives. Everything we did, even after we became police officers, and that was a great time, learning law enforcement, going out on patrol. He was in the jails, but I was going out on patrol. And that took over our lives. But every waking moment that we had, other than being at work, we were training. We were learning about jiu-jitsu and learning about MMA. At that time, it was called No Holds Barred.
Yeah. And
it just took over our lives. And it's ultimately why we started Tapout, because it was such a big part of our lives that, like any business person, you want to, every cop has a side hustle. So every cop you'll ever meet, just ask them what a side hustle is. They all have them. And that was our side hustle. And we said, hey, let's just start a little t-shirt company. It just turned out to be big.
The start of that is very similar to another guest we had on the show a few months back, Brian Smith, who started UGG Boots. And same kind of thing. He started selling them right out of the trunk of his car, on the beach in California, and it just exploded. Is that how that developed? We kind of, literally out of the trunk of the car at MMA fights.
Did you have any idea how big it could be? It seems, looking back, that in 1997, it would have been hard to imagine what the sport would become.
Yeah, I mean, I think we had both thoughts. In some ways you were like, we would talk about, we're going to sell 1 million shirts. But I remember sitting one day and trying to figure out how many employees and how many people it would take to sell 1 million shirts, and how many shirts we'd have to actually have to sell 1 million shirts, and how much money it would cost to print those shirts before we sent them out. And I remember just being blown away. Like, there's no way, I can't even imagine us having that many employees. How are we ever going to do that? But at the same time, we just knew in our gut, when you have a great feeling about something, you just know in your gut, this is going to be huge. Because, it's so funny, I was watching an interview with Mark Zuckerberg, and I think it was Mark, and he was talking about how he just started training jiu-jitsu, and he said, everybody I introduce to jiu-jitsu comes and starts training. I have like 100% win rate on showing my friends jiu-jitsu, and then they want to come train. And that's and when he said that, I was like, it brought me right back to that moment when we were doing that, and we were showing it to our friends in law enforcement, and every single one of them. I mean, I have friends that became, like, I'm not a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but they became black belts in jiu-jitsu before I did, because so many people, everybody we showed it to, all of a sudden became, huge fans of mixed martial arts and jiu-jitsu. And so knowing that, how sticky it was, I just believed that it was going to be big. And we would always talk about that. Like, this is going to blow up because it can't help but cream rises to the top.
Yeah.
This can't help but rise to the top because everybody loves to watch it.
Yeah. There's something that happens when, as entrepreneurs, we follow both what we are passionate about and then what we know is resonant, right? Like that was resonating, even though most of the country had never heard of it. A good 90% of the country that maybe had heard of MMA was actively lobbying to get political regulation to get it off the TVs, you know? I mean, remember
which worked in its favor, I think,
Yeah, I remember when I used the term cockfighting earlier, that's what John McCain called it. Yeah. He ended up running for president about 10 years after he called it human cockfighting. They were trying to erase the sport, but it couldn't be stopped because it was resonating so much with people. And that's been my experience too. My friends who come to the gym with me and try out jiu-jitsu, they stick around almost always. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. It's great when those two pieces that you said, that's perfectly said. Like, when those two things intersect, your passion and something that's resonating with the world intersect together, because, how many times do we have passions that are like, I have a passion for collecting like Star Wars figures, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be, like this huge thing. But this was that thing that I knew that, me and my partner we would sit I could remember sitting in Carl's Jr. with him in Corona, California, and we would sit and we would have lunch there. And by the time we were done talking, we were having dinner there too. We would just talk about how big this thing is going to be. And then ultimately in 2001, when the Fertittas bought it, it was just game over at that point. We were so excited. We were just all in. I quit my job, I think the next year, just going, hey, this is going to be it. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. That's
an incredible story to turn a side hustle into not just your full-time job, but a business that's like instantly recognizable around the world. Tapout pretty quickly became synonymous with the UFC, synonymous with MMA as a sport in a way that no other brand really has been able to do, or very few brands have been able to do with their sport. Maybe like some golf apparel brands are very closely associated with golf, or like Air Jordan is so associated with basketball. But that's a very, very difficult thing to do, and it happened for y'all. And Tapout, from the perspective of an MMA fan, like, deserves a lot of credit for the success of the sport, because being able to show it off, being able to go out and wear a Tapout shirt to, dinner with your friends on a Friday, it said something about who you were as a person, and it was a little subtle advertisement for the sport without directly advertising the sport and directly advertising the organization, the UFC, right? Like, I think without Tapout in that critical period of the early 2000s for the UFC, it's way harder for the UFC and necessarily MMA as a sport to see that type of growth that it had at that very, very critical period where it was taking a big leap.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to feel like we played a part in that for sure. People used to call, they would see, and they'd see our shirts, and they didn't always know we were the owners. And they would, that's those Tapout fights, right? And then
they would call, yeah.
Of course, we didn't correct anybody.
Yeah, of course
we
not.
wanted to think that, but we did. We talked about that. There's people, I think we all, as business owners, you derive inspiration from other companies, and we were always talking about, we want to be what Nike is to basketball. We want to be that to mixed martial arts. And I remember getting some info back from a board meeting about Nike talking about Tapout and what we were doing at Tapout, and that conversation coming up when we thought that was the biggest thing ever. When all of a sudden we find out Nike's talking about us in their board meetings, because that they were always the thing. They were always what we were looking at. And I remember my partner used to say, just to dream of being just Nike, we want to surpass Nike. We want to be better and bigger than that. And, it all didn't, there are things that got sideways and didn't always turn out the way we wish they would have turned out. Of course, my partner was killed in 2009 in a car accident. And so that stuff took away from that. But I always cherish those dreams that we had when we were pushing, because I think, people say, you shoot for the stars, and at least I landed on the moon, or I'll paraphrase, but that's kind of how it turned out for us. It was, we were always shooting big. We were always believing big, but at the same time, we were always scared to death because things were, we were firefighters. We were constantly putting out fires. We were self-capitalized. We were all making all those decisions ourselves. And we'd never printed a shirt in our life and never owned a business in our life, really.
You guys didn't, you said you're self-capitalized. You guys didn't have to go out and get external financing to grow the business? Wow. No,
we were all self-capitalized, living off, $20,000 credit card that we just happened to have that we maxed out and went out early, pretty much on. So we were just really about relationships and, selling our shirts online. We were like one of the first, I consider us the first clothing online retailer. Nobody was doing clothing online retail at the time. In 1997, 98, I think we built our site in early 98 and maybe 97. But that we were the first retail. Nobody would sell their clothes online. At that time, you had companies like Hurley and other companies out there, Metal Militia, but they couldn't sell their clothing online because the retailers were giving too much pushback, and they were all in retail. So none of the retailers would let them do online sales. They wanted them to push all their customers or anybody who went to their website to the retailers. Yeah. So they would all have find out where we're being sold, and you click on that and you can see, type in your zip code, and then you could see the location closest to you that was selling Hurley or Metal Militia or whatever brand you were looking for. So, but for us, we didn't have we weren't in any stores, so we didn't have that luxury. So we were a legitimate online retailer in 1998, and we were selling clothing, and everybody thought, I remember everybody we talked to, everybody we told this, said that'll never work. You can't sell clothing online. People need to try it on. Yeah. But we knew in our heads, we're selling t-shirts. How many people don't know what size t-shirt they wear? Yeah, sometimes they like different fits and stuff, but I think they'll learn that. They'll understand that. And so we were an online retailer from from the outset.
So not being in stores probably worked out, I guess worked out to your advantage in a weird way, is that you could leapfrog right over that and not get that pushback from the retailers and go straight online. So that's...
Yeah, I think it helped us grow in a different way. I think I definitely know the pushback that you get when you're in retail, that nobody wants any forward thinking in retail. They want what is selling. So there's always a struggle from an artist perspective when you're trying to create a brand, and when you go to the buyers for the retail stores, they're like, what is this? We want what's selling right now in our store. Yeah. Like, this is killing it. Like, you guys, you have this shirt that's selling, you have one shirt that's selling 1 million shirts. We want more of that. Can you create a different design that looks just like that? Like, how is it different if it looks just like that? It would drive us nuts.
And they're happy for you to run that straight into the ground.
Oh, they don't. That's exactly. I'll tell you that's what's happened. That's what's happened later on after we sold the company. That's what they do. These guys who didn't, don't build the company themselves. They just want to make more of what's already selling. They don't understand that fashion is a moving target, and you can't. You're not gonna. It's not something that you always have to be thinking ahead of everybody, and that's what we could do that when we were online. And if something didn't work, it was so easy to go, let's throw it up online, and people see that now. You split testing stuff. We weren't doing split testing back then, but you could throw something online, see if it works. If it doesn't, you're like, well, I only printed 40 of them or 48 of them, so. We'll sell what we can. And when they sell, and then we just left them up. It wasn't like you had to blow them out. Everybody else, nowadays you go into retail, they're like, hey, that every square inch is measured. How much is that square inch worth? We have to sell this product out so we get it out of the way for the new stuff coming in. We were like, just leave it up on the website. We have 48 of them. We'll sell them at full price. We'll just leave them up there. And when they sell, they sell.
Yeah, I think Tapout was on the very, very early wave of more independence in the business landscape, more independence in fashion. And over the last 20 years, we've seen a continuing trend of decentralization. There's not only 3 television channels that you can go watch. We don't all listen to the same musical artists. We don't all watch the same movies. We don't all get our news from the same places. And that's continued to be more and more and more and more fragmented throughout society. And now independent business owners can have so much more success than they ever have been able to. And I think the final roadblock for independent business owners is to be able to be independent, to not have to go through a retailer, right? And the internet was such a good equalizer for that. And y'all were, on the really, really front end. But I like what you're saying about balancing the art of the entrepreneurial journey with the, concrete thinking of the CFOs of the world. Right? That type of mind is very important to make sure that this can be profitable and you could scale the business, and they're going to look at what works and what's selling. But the artist in all of us who are business owners has to be able to have its avenue to be able to express.
Yeah, you have to be able to step back, look at from 30,000 feet, and look at what's going on and what's going on around you, taking inspiration from what's going on around you and where the market's going, because it's constantly changing. In 2008, we noticed during that crash, I think. And I just kind of put my own spin on it. I could be totally wrong on this, but what my spin was, at that time, we were printing stuff that was all over the shirt. It was big. And if you go back and look at that time period, you could see all the shirts were overprinted. And in 2008, when the crash happened, everything pulled back. And my reasoning is there was a lot of brand names of people pushing out there. Oh, look at this. I got this $30 shirt on, or this $100, pair of jeans on, this big old logo, LV logo coming down the side. Well, when your friend's losing his house, you don't necessarily want to talk about what you're flaunting around. And I think that a lot of people pulled back from that. And you can look at that right at that moment, all the logos went really small. Everything changed on the landscape after the crash in 2008. And you could see all the big logos, all the pants with the big, huge, Gucci on the side, all that stuff disappeared for a minute. And of course, it comes back again. All fashion it just keeps coming back. But at that time, you could see everything disappeared. And that was my perspective, is that everybody was just pulling back because they didn't want to flaunt that stuff in front of their friends. And so, but at retail in middle America, a lot of that stuff, the old stuff is still working. But we're seeing, it in our area, we were in Los Angeles, and in our area, that stuff was disappearing. And everybody was pulling back from that. And everybody was going to just a plain t-shirt or something real small, black on black, or a little logo right here. And so we were trying to go back to that. But of course, the retailers, all of them were having pushback because
they wanted you to sell what had worked last year.
And what's working in middle America still, because they haven't caught up yet. What's happening on the coastlines is already changed. But middle America, where most of your money's made, or most of your customers are, they're still buying what was working, and so that hasn't hit them yet.
So when y'all sold after Charles Lewis passed away, tell me about how that was for you mentally, because selling a business that you started, that you've seen grow into, everything that you could have ever hoped for it to be. That's got to be a really tough journey.
Yeah, I tried to put the face on for a minute. I think for another year we kind of kept going, and I really believed that he wanted us to be. I still had that Nike dream in my head, echoing in my head, and I wanted to do that for Charles. Let's build this to Nike for him. Let's keep him a part of it, keep his dream alive. But at the end of the day, I just, when you start out on a mission with somebody and you're on your way to Everest and your partner, you guys are hiking up there and your friend halfway up doesn't make it, I'm going home, bro. I'm just at that point, I'm bringing this body home, and I'm because what got me up, what was going to get me up there. And a lot of people might be different. And I thought I was different. I thought I wanted to take it up to, we wanted to keep climbing to the summit. But man, every day just didn't feel the same anymore because of those conversations that we would have, for 8 hours straight inside of a Carl's Jr. We didn't have those conversations anymore. That wasn't there anymore. And it just kind of took the wind out of my sails. And I just said, look, it's not that I still don't want the company to go on. I still want it to be never forgotten. I still want it to be remembered. I still want, Tapout to always be remembered as part of what, grew the UFC, especially in the early days. I think it'll always be a part of that conversation. But I just didn't feel it anymore in my gut. It didn't get me up in the morning anymore. And I just felt like it was time to pull out. And so we started looking for, some buyers.
So you sold another 18 months or 2 years after that? Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, correct. Towards the end of 2010, I think.
How did he left a huge void in the entire sport, right? And that's evidenced by the UFC putting him in the Hall of Fame. And for people that maybe started watching MMA after 2010 or I don't know, had their head up their butt during that time, they don't recognize how significant that is. That is the founder of Nike being in the Basketball Hall of Fame, right? That just doesn't happen anywhere else. And so for him to get that recognition, it's not only him getting that recognition, it's the company, it's the mission, it's the whole crew getting that recognition from the sport. I like that. That makes all the sense that you would feel this energy suck within the company too during that time.
Yeah, to my knowledge, he's the only non-fighter in the Hall of Fame for the UFC. So, I mean, that means a lot to us. I just think we always want to be a part of the conversation. It was, when we were building it, and luckily enough, I just look back at all the great people whose backs this sport was built on, guys like that will never be remembered. Like, there's guys out there like Travis Fulton. Shannon Rich right now has the most MMA fights of any person in history, I think. This guy has 100+ fights. Travis Fulton and him used to like compete every fight that somebody asked. If they need a fighter, they just call him up and go, "Hey man, can you fight on September 16th? We're fighting in Iowa." Yeah, you're gonna fly me out? I get the normal $300. Okay, I'll be there. It's like these guys who fight everywhere. And, those guys, I don't know how much they'll be remembered. And it's sad because I hope somebody, they keep writing books and keep remembering these guys who helped build this sport, because there were so many names out there. So many guys who were famous at the beginning. A friend of mine, Aaron Brink of Huntington Beach, just passed away. And unfortunately, he was battling with other demons and stuff in his life. But I mean, that was a guy, when you heard like Aaron Brink is fighting on this card, you were like, "Oh man, we gotta go watch this fight." But these are underground illegal fights in California that you had to use like a secret password to go into. I can remember going into this. There was a fight called Neutral Grounds, and went into this U-Haul dealership. It was a big warehouse, and it had like a little front counter. U-Haul dealership. And you give the secret code, you pay your $40, and you walk through the door, and you went into this back warehouse, and they had a ring set up inside, or a cage, and two like short bleachers, like those like or 4 short bleachers that have like maybe 10, 5-10 seats, and I mean, that's the early days of mixed martial arts, and all this that you see today was all built on the backs of those people. And it's really, I just hope they always get remembered, because I really believe Tapout will be a part of that conversation forever.
Oh yeah. I agree 100%.
So how did you, after that time, there's this sale and you're making a massive change in your life. And there's got to be this point where you're grieving not only for the loss of your friend, but probably the loss of Tapout, because you've sold it, and you've got to look at, how do I decide what I'm doing next? How did you go through that process of deciding where you were going to move on from there?
Well, good question, but honestly, the truth is, I got kind of a slow letdown, because I stayed on for 5 more years as president of the company. So, and me and Strape were, our other partner was still part of that, building the brand and still doing those things. We weren't as involved, because there was no, they worked in a different way. They went to a licensing format. So we were a production company. So we were putting together products, building products in-house, and printing in-house in some cases too. So a lot of that stuff was being built in-house, or at least it was being designed and put together in-house, where they went to a licensing format. So they had outside licensees licensing the t-shirts, licensing shoes, licensing other products. And so our day basically consisted of going to this, going to the shirt guys on one day and talking about designs and looking at the designs that they came up with and going, yay, nay, yay, nay. That's where all those problems came up. You're like, man, this is horrible. Like, how do we tell you, like, we need to change this? But this is what the retailers love. This is what they want. So we would go through that daily, and the battle for that almost became too much. It was almost more stress than it was worth it at some point, because you're just constantly battling, where we were in our own environment and could make those decisions. And, we were the final word. Now we were almost the final word, because they were the actual franchisee, and they had to, so short of the product hurting the brand, they could put out whatever they wanted.
Did you find that your framework for decision making changed when you moved from being the essentially the sole owner and decision maker to Now you're not the owner and you've got to deal with this other party. How did you reference your decisions when you were saying, oh, I don't want you to do this, I want you to do that, I approve this, I don't approve that? How were you?
Well,
how did that change?
Well, I'd like to say I was better, but I have to say that you get beat up, you get worn out, and it was different. Like I said, it was just different. When everything landed on you, you were okay to make that decision. Let it land on me. I'm good. This is the decision I want to make. If it doesn't work, I understood how that played out. I understood the consequences. I understood we might lose a little bit of money, but I always took educated risks because I felt like if it doesn't work out, we could still move the product here. We could still do this. We could still leave it up on the website. Nobody knows that it's not working or working. They don't see how much quantity we have or if we sold 1 million of them or 2 of them. Yeah. So online, a lot of that stuff we pushed online. On the online business was always a good business for us, doing $30 or $40 million a year on there. So it was always a good business for us. So we enjoyed using that as a way to stabilize the business. But when you're in retail and these guys are basically telling you, well, we can put out what we want, as long as it doesn't hurt the company. We're looking for you guys to help influence. And they really would try to help us, but we're like, this is not good. Like, do you have a different artist? Like, this is not good. I do not like this artist. I don't like the way they're printing. They put all the bells and whistles are on there. Look, the little rubber thing on the sleeve and you're like, yeah, but it was so much nicer when it was a little gritty. When it wasn't the little rubber thing on the sleeve and we had the little just regular woven label here, it was like, it just, things changed. So in some ways I got beat up and in some ways I made a lot of bad decisions, and I wish not necessarily that there were even decisions, they were just lack of decision, and a lack of decision will kill your company. I mean, people, that's sometimes the worst thing you can do. Was
there something that you struggled with deciding about? That you say the lack of decision? No,
not necessarily. It was just always, I mean, lack of decision by going, okay, what?
Yeah,
okay.
You couldn't fight it anymore. Yeah,
I understand. Yeah. I understand you guys spent, 40 days on this and you guys have changed it 10 times or we haven't been able to find a happy medium and this is what you got. You got to go out tomorrow and this is due right now. So do what you got to do.
Did you find that having that, being in that situation began to dilute the brand for you or dilute your connection to it? If you're saying, oh, all right, that's not what I would have done. That doesn't really speak to me, but, go ahead, do it anyway.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at one point they made a decision to change the logo and me and Scrape were like, behind closed doors, we were out of our minds. We were like, change the logo.
You're like, that's what we've got.
Logo?
Yeah.
The logo is
we're Nike.
Yeah. You don't change the swoosh if you're Nike, right?
Swoosh.
Yeah.
And not only that, they turned it into a logo that was like, it's hard. I mean, anybody who's worked on like, who's an artist who will get this, but it was like, it was like a standard font, it was basically like, oh man, anybody could just turn on their old print shop, software and write Tapout and then push that button and then boom, it turns into that logo. It was a horrible, to me, it was, of course time told because I switched it back, but for me, it was just horrible. It was like we had created a logo that took an artist to draw it. And now they want to switch it to some like standard font. It just
What was their thinking behind that? What was the rationale behind? Because that's a big decision. I mean, the Tapout logo is the brand. So why would they change?
It's a very, very recognizable.
Oh, yeah.
logo.
Yeah. What was the thought behind making a change like that? It's pretty significant.
I think it was I talked about the change of how things had changed throughout around that time in 2010 and 2008, 2009, 2010. And at that time, they were we were still trying to make that change. And like, we were trying to find our footing. And so I want to say it was, I'm throwing a date out there, but I could be off like 2 or 3 years. It's we changed the logo maybe around 2014, and it was they were just trying to distance themselves from what was out there.
Yeah.
And what they had already put out, what was old Tapout, what they would call old Tapout.
Yeah.
And so
Okay.
changed the logo. That was the quick fix, right? That wasn't like, to me, that wasn't the let's put in the work fix. That was like, let's just fix it real quick. We'll change the logo and
see, it's our company now, Dan. It's ours now. We've got this new logo.
Yeah.
I see that happen a lot with businesses that go through a transition to new ownership. Is a lot of times the new ownership has a need to prove themselves or a need to, put their stamp on it, kind of put their brushstrokes on the artwork. And that's hard when it's not your artwork, but you bought it, right? you bought the artwork. You're not the artist. So it's in your living room. You can do whatever you want. I can swipe a big red pen right across a Picasso as long as I own it. But it's probably going to look terrible. But I see a lot of business owners do that. Buy a business, they feel like they've got to put their stamp on it instead of taking a step back, saying, "Hey, what made this special was the art that came before me. That's why I bought it in the first place."
I mean, that's a perfect example. I mean, I couldn't come up with a better example. That was a perfect example. They buy a Picasso, they pay $54 million, $100 million, whatever, $300 million. And they bring it home, they put it on their wall, and they go, you know what, this whole area over here's got nothing on it. I don't really like how I did that stroke. And they just pull out their paintbrush and they start painting. I mean, that to me, that's not a good decision. But you have to respect that they paid a lot of money for this company, and they can, it's theirs to make that decision with now.
Yeah, you gotta grit your teeth and
we were still
at
a piece of it, but we were still living with them. But they obviously, they were the ones who came in and taken a chance on it, and we respected that decision, and we wanted to push. We were still, as hard as some of that was, that's always behind closed doors. We wanted to put on a good face and come out with great product and just keep. Yeah, maybe this is off or that's off, or, all of a sudden this product's coming out and you're like, don't agree with this or that. But you still wanted to be proud of certain products, certain things that are coming out.
Yeah.
I'm still proud of, there's still, I think the name could be strong forever. Who knows what this morphs into? Right now, they're doing a really, really good number with the Tapout drinks right now, and that are in, all over the place. And I think that's doing great. And so, I'd love to be able to see if that's all it turned out to be, and I see Tapout drinks for the next 50 years, I'll be good with that too.
Yeah. What is most exciting to you as far as the projects in post Tapout life?
I think the most exciting thing to me is, I got married after that. I had kids. I had kids previously, but I had never been married. And I just am building this family and building my kids. And I think introducing my kids, like usually my kid be sitting right here. Yeah. But I just want I want my kids, all my kids who are all great at what they do, all really amazing athletes and personalities. And they each have their own individual, thing that they do, and they're just all so great. And I love watching my kids grow up into those things. And it always excites me to wonder where they're going to be, 20 years from now. And as for my little one, Daniel, who, are two little ones who live with us, Daniel and Destiny, they got so much personality. And Daniel's a speaker. I just had him speak in front of 3,000 people, standing on
awesome.
stage.
Wow.
Delivering this 10-minute speech.
And how old is he?
Memorized. He's 6.
So you bring him in already at age 6 into the work that you're doing.
Oh, that's what, we have a podcast called the Pretty and Punk Podcast about kids and entrepreneurs, about being an entrepreneur, raising kids. And it's I feel like that whole life is such a weird push and pull dynamic because you have a love for your business, but you love your kids too. You love your kids more than anything in the world, but you love your business more than anything in the world. And some things are pulling you towards your business, because if you just threw your hands up and said, I got to do my family thing, your business is going to crash and burn.
Yeah, you can't pick, and they don't have to be separate.
But the problem is that so many people do pick. Yeah. They pick their business, and their family crashes and burns. And so how many people you see, how many entrepreneurs do you see, at the end of the day, they get done and they turn around and there's fire and destruction behind them.
Yeah.
And they've lost their family. Their kids won't talk to them. And
I know a lot. I know a lot of guys like that. I know a lot of wealth advisors like that.
Yeah,
they're crushing it. They're making, more than anybody else has ever dreamed of making in the industry. But they're on wife number 4, and their kids moved as far across the country as they could to not ever talk to them again. Right. But I think bringing your kids into your business, Dan, is like the greatest gift you can give to them. I mean, that's what Sean did for me. And it took me a while, to realize what type of advantage he was giving me. And I don't mean, giving your kid a job in the business. I mean, giving him an insight into what it is that dad does day in and day out. And it's a liberty that entrepreneurs have, right? If we worked in an office somewhere in a skyscraper downtown, we wouldn't be able to bring our children into the business to see what dad does every day. But as a business owner, you can do that. And you can say, hey, come check out what we're doing. Check out the craft. Check out what is putting food on the table for you and your sister. And that's what my dad always did for me. I knew what dad did to put money on the table. Like, I would go to school and ask other kids, like, what does your dad do? And 90% of them had no idea what their dad did. And I'd go, like, you're a loser. How do you not know what your dad does? First of all, you're a loser. Second of all, your dad's a loser. How do you not know what your dad does? Right? I was like, I know exactly what my dad does. I could give a classroom presentation on what my dad does. And that's because he communicates it with me. We talk about it, and I get to see the craft, and the younger I was, the less I got to see. But the older I got, the more he would let me in and say, hey, this is how you do this. These are the skills that you're not going to learn if you go get a job in this industry. You only learn by doing it for 30 years or whatever. And that's what we used to do for our children when we worked at the homestead, right? When we were blacksmiths and woodworkers, that's what we did. Is we said, hey, son, you're about 5 or 6 now, so time to learn how to weld or whatever the craft was. And we taught them the craft from the time they were about your son's age. And then when they became an adult, they were better than anyone who could ever choose.
They had competency.
They were
master craftsmen.
Yeah.
Yep.
They were master craftsmen. And when you start at 22, you start your craft at 22 after you study a bunch of irrelevant topics in college and goof off in high school. You can never be as good as that kid who started when he was 6. And so you're giving your children the most unfair advantage over their peers that you could possibly give them.
Yeah, I got to say that was a perfect explanation. That was, and that's exactly what we preach, is that, like, introduce. I mean, Sean, you know this, that you guys probably have the best job in the world. We all, as dads, hope that one day our kids are even going to want to be next to us, even going to want to be in the same city as us, let alone working with us. We hope for that. We pray for that. And I also, I hope that they go on and do whatever they want to do, that they do that the best they can do too. But I want to give them the tools, because nobody's going to teach them at school how to do what we do. No one's going to, they're not going to have those skills. And you said it perfectly when you said at 20 years old, when they go out on they go out there and hit the market and they're trying to figure out what to do in life. They're in today's world, especially, no time more than right now. If they're going to be so far behind that I don't know that they'll ever be able to catch up. That if you're not learning the skills you need early on, you'll just never be able to catch up. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, well, I think you're doing it so smart. When I see a lot of guys who commit only to work, and they fail to recognize what that success is really costing them. And it's, and it's costing them that connection with purpose of raising raising, their kids. And I say, when I look at our job as dads, is our job is to help our kids work ourselves out of a job, right? Our job as a parent is to work ourselves out of a job. And what I always wanted to do was give my kids two things. One is competency, and doing that by taking them places where they gained experience, because, people who have knowledge are better than people who are ignorant, but people who have experience are better than people who have knowledge, because your experience will trump that. So I would take them places and have them do things and get them to that point of competency. But the other thing that I always wanted to do was to dole out that responsibility as I work myself out of a job by saying, okay, this year you're a year older, you have now this privilege.
Yeah, we would get birthday privileges.
Yeah, every year. So, okay, you can cut your hair however you want. Take your room however you want. Wear whatever you want. Choose your own food. And just dole out those responsibilities and those privileges over time, so that when the time came where they were an adult, it wasn't a big shock to their system. So that was the first thing I tried to do is kind of develop competency. And the other was develop a sort of a clarity of purpose by connecting to faith, having family principles, understanding what the rules of interactions were in restaurants and social settings and other types of things. So I figured if I could do those, then, I'm halfway there.
Yeah, Dan, do you have your kids recite rules in the backseat of the car when you're taking them out in public? Because that is what my dad did. We would have
rules.
We would have.
Tell me more about.
So we would have.
I'm gonna have to steal some of this.
This was one of the best. I mean, we could talk for a lot about the things that I think he did well. That I'm like, when I have children, we're doing this thing,
right?
But the restaurant rules is one of my favorite. So when we were going, and we went out to eat a lot because he worked a lot, right? So it's like, hey man, I'm done with a long day. Let's go somewhere good and eat. And so we would have, this is rules for this is how you behave in public. And they were inside voice, stay in your chair, eat your food. Very simple. Inside voice, stay in your chair, eat your food. But I'm 4 years old in the back seat of the SUV, and Dad goes, all right, what's the restaurant rules? I go, inside voice, stay in your chair, eat your food. And then we'd go out with maybe other families, and I'd see some little twerp running around, causing a scene, yelling at his sister or whatever it was, and looking like an idiot. And it made me so, what's going on? What's going on with him? But then I was able to grow into an adult that was able to behave and interact with the adults when I was a kid. And there were a lot of
that's
scenarios.
So perfectly done. Like, I love that. And there's always a balance, because I'm always arguing with myself in my own head, and we do the same thing with our kids. We don't have to recite the rules, but they're actually really, really, really good at in restaurants for us. And they don't own iPads or anything like that. So we don't, we're not one of the, we don't sit them down in front of an iPad. When they get in there, they sit up nice. We usually have them dressed nice. Our kid will wear, when we go to a nicer restaurant, he's wearing a jacket and a bow tie. We walk into this restaurant. I'm actually the underdressed one because I'm still wearing the t-shirt. But we'll have him have conversation. We'll have him go up and speak to the manager and tell him what he liked about the food and how whatever he liked about the experience. We'll have him go up and have that conversation with the manager. We'll have him ask questions about how they do something. So he'll always have a compliment, a question that he'll give. And again, like, I try to balance that. I also don't want them to be too subdued where they're not willing to jump out and ask those questions and have those conversations. Of course, they're mowing the lawn here today. But I want them to be vocal. I want them to be energetic. I want them to have that too. So that's the fight in me, the dichotomy of, having this conversation. I want them to be conversationalists and have energy, but I also want them to be well behaved. And so we're always balancing our rules to those two things. How can we keep them? We want them to be great entrepreneurs, because, if you don't bring them to me, somebody asked me a few weeks ago, actually, do you have to bring your kids to all your meetings? And I was like, because they always see me with my kids at these meetings that I go to. And I said, no, I get to bring my kids to all my meetings.
Hell
I want my kids. If I don't teach them, who's going to teach them to negotiate? Who's going to teach them to have these conversations? When you sit down in a meeting, it's a battle of wits. We went to go meet with Mark Wahlberg a few weeks ago. And, I knew that was going to be kind of a battle of not a battle, because we're doing something together. We're having this conversation, but I'm having to bring him into this deal. And it's going to be him telling me his side and me telling him my side. I needed my kids to see that. I need my kids to see that. They have to be able to do that when they get old enough to build their businesses. So I think that having your kids understand all those things, I love what you guys are doing. The first thing you guys said when you introduced yourselves, I was like, dude, a little piece of me just went, man, I hope we can do something cool like that when they're old enough, because I love that.
You're giving them a huge advantage. They're going to have seen hundreds of business interactions, social settings, those types of things. You were giving them such an advantage.
Such an advantage. Yeah. Massive. I remember, you a football fan?
Decently. I'm an MMA fan. Everything other than that, I kind of know about.
Okay. So there's a head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, Kyle Shanahan. And when he was hired by the 49ers, or his dad is Mike Shanahan, who was a coach for many teams, one of which was the Broncos.
I know the Shanahan.
Okay. Yeah. So I remember when Kyle Shanahan was hired by the 49ers, there was a little bit of talk in the media that he only got hired because he's Mike Shanahan's son. And I was reading it on my phone, sitting next to my dad, and I go, he didn't get hired because he is Mike Shanahan's son. He got hired because he's Mike Shanahan's son. Meaning he was around these teams when he was a kid. He saw the insights of how you draw.
He knows it. Yeah.
He knows way more about football than anybody who started when they were in college could ever dream about knowing. So, yeah, he got it because he's Mike Shanahan's son.
But he got it because he's Mike Shanahan's
exactly.
son.
And
that's so true. I love that.
So,
and that's it. You know what? And I say, and that's so perfect, because how many entrepreneurs do you know are so, trying to separate everything? You think of, Steve Jobs' daughter came out with, I think Lisa came out with this book, where she's, obviously not totally badmouth their dad, but, they were so broken that his daughters or any of his kids, I don't know how much they knew about his business, but you could see, obviously, he was 1,000% into his business.
Yeah.
And then maybe he was really good with his kids when he came home, but they definitely probably didn't understand everything that he was doing. Unfortunately, he passed away. They were too young, but they were younger, and his older or his younger kids. But, you have to, I don't know how I had, these two young ones, they're younger, they're 3 and 6, and they're not gonna, I don't know how long I'm going to be around. Right now, I just, I'm in my, I just turned 51, and I'm not, I don't know how long I'm going to be around. I have to give them their tools right now. And to me, I'm on borrowed time. I always said after 50, I'm on borrowed time. Not that I don't want to live to be 80, but I never thought I'd live this far anyway. So, I was a police officer. I was kicking in doors and, flying out windows, and I've done everything that I probably shouldn't do, and that probably almost killed me a million times. I've been shot at a million times. I can't even count how many times I've heard bullets whizzing by my head. Bullet whizzing by your head it's a crazy thing. The first time you ever hear it, you hear this, and you're like, "What is that?" And you realize it took me like 10 seconds to realize I was being shot at. But those are the things that I'm on borrowed time here. I'm over 50 years old now. And so everything about what I do is trying to prepare everything in my life for my kids to go on and find their own greatness. And, I don't know everything, but I do know this, that I always felt like, that, my parents, they were amazing parents. I mean, they're amazing parents. They're still married today. They gave me this great foundation. But a lot of what I didn't know, and I think a lot of what, I even go, I wish I would have been introduced to, like my son, pushing him in front of a crowd to speak in front of 3,000 people. I have him do affirmations every day. We pray every morning, affirmations. Then he does a quote or, some sort of speech or a poem or something. And then we do prayers at night and gratefulness at night. And we do that because I want him to understand all of it. I want to feed his brain so much. He's homeschooled. I want to give him every tool that he needs. And I still feel like like if your son, and you get this, Sean, your son's about to go to battle and you want to give him every tool, everything is on the line, and you're trying to teach him all of the sword fighting and everything that he could do and ground fighting and everything, because man, if he don't win this, he may not come back. And that's how I feel about business and things that he's doing. I want him to have every tool that he needs. What's up, buddy? Yeah, just give me a few minutes, okay?
Hey, put him on.
Yeah. Okay. And we're talking about you.
Yeah,
dude.
we're talking about you. There he is.
The affirmation, like what you did.
I'm sorry. I was doing a podcast, buddy. I was doing some he said his mom did his affirmations and I didn't do his affirmations with him. That's okay.
Well, we're sorry for keeping Dad from you from affirmation time today.
They said, "Well, sorry for keeping Dad from you." Hey, could you do Man in the Arena for them?
Sure. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out that the strong man stumbles, or what the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belonged to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face strives,
Who's marred
by dust and sweat and blood, who does actually strive to do the deed, who knows great enthusiasm, great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he failed well done greatly, so that his place shall never be those cold and timid souls, neither victory nor defeat."
Heck yeah,
Hey, man, that was awesome.
You are the man in the arena, and you'll be the man in the arena in the future, dude.
Good job, buddy.
Hey, Dan, you know what I loved about that?
What's that?
Is that so many times that, and this is, we've been doing this podcast for a while. There are times when people will come in and they'll shush them away. They'll swash them away. They go, no. Hey, Dad's doing this. You have to go away. I'll get to you later. And what you did just then is you brought him in and you put him on and you lived out exactly what you were saying. And had you shoved him away, you would have been so full of shit. And none of what we had spent the last hour talking about would have had any resonance. But you were living. And
you know what? I almost did.
You're walking your talk, man. You're walking your talk.
You didn't have a mic, so I was like, oh, shoot. Yeah, because normally I'd mic him up. And we're on our mics. When we're at the podcast studio, we can, we'll all have mics and stuff. But I realized he didn't have a mic, so I was like, oh, okay, well, they're not going to be able to hear you. But,
No, you did it. You did it.
Well, you didn't get to experience it today because our producer's on vacation. But normally, she would sit there, do the audio check, video check with you, with her child in her lap. That's awesome. And it's kind of a test for us because we can gauge if somebody doesn't like the fact that she's got her kid there, we're probably not going to get along. But if their eyes light up and they go, oh, that's so cool, you get to work with your daughter right there, then we know, hey, there are people. And I'm pretty sure you would have been in the category of, oh man, this is so cool.
Yeah. So we all want to understand skill sets. I love when I walk into a business and I see. I ask sometimes, you see the kid and the kid kind of looks like the lady working at the off, you're like, and she goes, we were just at this vacation place and we went to this little store or side store, like a little convenience store. And it looked like the whole family was working there. Dad's in the back stocking the shelves, son's up front working the cash register. Mom comes walking up. And we're like, is that your son? And oh yeah, and that's my husband back there. We're like, we just talked to him for like 30 minutes, just admiring the fact that they get to go through that. Because like you said earlier, Sanger, that, this is how families grew up, working in the fields or farm or small mercantile or whatever it was. That's how America was built. That's how for thousands of years, that's how we built our businesses, because that's all you had. A family was a unit that worked together for success and for protection. And I don't think things have changed as much as people would like to think they have.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, you're making some great decisions. What would you say would be your final decision-making tip for business owners and leaders?
A decision-making tip. I think what I had to learn as a leader and believe me, I struggled with that for a long time. Like I never felt, and I still feel like, in some ways, like you always feel that imposter syndrome because everything rests on your shoulders and you feel like, well, I don't have an MBA. I never graduated from Harvard. I'm not that guy. I'm just a regular dude who's seen a lot. And at the end of the day, I just tell leaders that they have to make a decision. The decisions, what everybody's scared to do is make a decision. But the truth is any decision's better than no decision because people are looking at you. Your people are looking to you to make a decision. And if you decide the him and han is what it will kill a company. Yeah. That will kill a company faster than making a decision because a decision, and not that you got to trust that, not that a bad decision is a good decision, but a bad decision is better than no decision. And when you got to trust your skill set. You've seen a lot in your life. You've gone through a lot of these issues already. You're seeing these same issues come up over and over again. You're a firefighter at its best. And somebody gives you a decision to make. You just have to make a decision. Just make a quick, good decision to the best of your ability and live with it and own up to it. And if it goes sideways, you fix it and you keep moving on, but make a decision.
Love it.
Thanks, Dan. Where can people connect with the work that you're doing and find your podcast?
We call it the Pretty and Punk podcast for entrepreneurs with kids. We're just relaunching it. So we've been out for about a year. I was doing a lot of consulting for different companies and I'm still consulting. So I'm doing a lot of that still, but we were so missing our podcast. It's just like a piece of our life that was missing. And so, and I love what you guys are doing. So we get to do a podcast, me and my wife. And I feel like that's really, just talking through all the stuff that we talked about today. A lot of the stuff we talked about today, business and kids and how it all works together, and get a woman's perspective from it because she sees things totally different than I see things. So, podcast, the Pretty Punk podcast for entrepreneurs with kids. And then also we just signed up for this new app called Intro where we do consulting and coaching. So anybody who needs coaching, you can go to Intro and get some coaching or consulting from us.
Cool. Sweet, man.
Hey, I love it.
Yeah, thanks for being here, dude. That was great.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Come back anytime.
Hey, thanks, guys.
What it struck me was looking at when you lose that passion, move on and move to passion and make sure you're constantly making that decision to move to passion. And that was my takeaway.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is in order to align your actions with your responsibility as both an entrepreneur and a father, it requires a lot of work and it requires purposeful incorporation of those two lives. And I'm more convinced after talking to Dan than I ever have that incorporating those lives purposefully is not only a positively good effort, but it's a fulfillment of the responsibility of both the entrepreneur and the father to integrate those lives. You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision and leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your support. It helps others find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more daily decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com and on Facebook and Instagram at Decidedly Podcast. Thanks again for listening. I'm Sanger Smith, and this is Decidedly.
Insights, advice, and comments provided by Sean Smith, Sanger Smith, and speakers identified as part of the Decidedly podcast should not be considered recommendations. Speakers not identified as members of Decidedly are expressing their opinion, and their statements should not be construed as reflecting the views of the Decidedly team. This podcast is produced solely for informational purposes, not personalized advice.